Frank Bohlen, and on behalf of the Bermuda Race Organizing Committee, God bless us, welcome to Bermuda.
Thank you.
I think that was an interesting race, eh? And it sort of pointed up some of the things we said early in the game. You sail what you find. And I was interested in some of the comments, questions about the weather forecast you were just listening to in the briefing. One of the reasons you had such interesting weather at the beginning, and maybe through the whole thing, was that frontal passage that never quite passed us. It was around a long time. And there was a lot of dither behind it, eh? Nothing as clear as a nice gutsy low. It was a high that sort of was elongated, kidney fashion and the rest. Really provided graphic illustration of the need to be sensitive to the resolution of the models you're playing with. So you sail to what you find and do the best you can and kept pushing the boat as far as you can go. It also, I thought, really pointed out the importance of sailing your boat. I think I said to some of you the other day, God forgive me, I sat down for lunch shortly before departure and I came across a story about golf. You know, that old man's game, golf. And the story was built around the Open, which is being played at the country club outside of Boston. One of the oldest clubs in the country, and the course had been designed for, quote, the old style golf. Whatever that is, I don't really know, but the old style golf turns out to be not quite as analytical as the new style golf. And then he started talking like that. I thought about us. The old style sailing, you know, paper charts and pencils and the rest of this good stuff, and look out and see what's going on, and driving your boat. And driving your boat a lot before you go off in a race, so that you can really get a sense of what's logy, what's overpowered, how the boat goes and how best the boat goes. Not relying too much on the models. But the questions that I got over the last 2 or 3 months, particularly dealing with Gulfstream, were all directed at models. And why the NOAA model was a little bit off from the Tide Tech model was a little bit off from ... I thought this race really pointed to the importance of sailing your boat. You start dropping into these little holes that are not well modeled, and so it's, I think, a lot to be learned. That was my perspective on it anyway, as one of the navigators in the game. Okay? So this afternoon we hope to have a little conversation among friends, and we're not afraid of being cryptic, or not impolite necessarily, but straight ahead spoken. One question I might have for you. How many use the GO system or an Iridium phone system for communication? Okay. And how many use a broader band system? So it's starting to get up there, sort of half. Even the cruising boats are starting to find that some of the things like the Certus, you know, the vessel Find 200 or something, are starting to become more common. The prices are coming down, and it makes a difference in your communication and what you can get and how much you can play with. We had some comments on that the last race, 2018, here, about what the GO was doing and not doing. So things are changing a bit in communication. What we try to do is to bring out a few navigators from the maybe class winners, we hope. And I can go down some lists here. Who's here? Anybody here from Reveille?
Yep.
What do you have to say about how you got to where you got?
Well, consistent with what you said. So I'm Jim Hammett. Nice to meet everybody. We're the double-handed class, so we're busy doing other things. Just having Iridium for downloading stuff. So I would download a weather file maybe once a day, and pretty much sailed VMG to Bermuda. We tried to go for that meander at the stream, but otherwise it's just VMG.
And you found the meander where
Yeah.
more or less where it belongs.
Yeah, so that worked well. We had a few knots there for a few hours. And I think we had a lot of cross current after that. But I would say after the stream, most of the time we had an adverse current.
Yeah.
Like after
And your position was where relative to the rum line?
we were a little bit to the east of it, right?
Yeah.
A little bit to the east, and then as it got light and lifted, we ended up to no, I think we stayed to the east all the way through.
All the way through.
Yeah.
A little bit to the west as we got down towards Bermuda. So.
The last 100 miles.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
The max current you found in the stream?
I don't know, I know 3 or something like that. And we got through it pretty quickly, I think. And then we tended to have like a knot and a half against us or perpendicular to us for the rest of the race. That seemed just kind of frustrating.
Interesting.
And then we were just sort of expecting the wind to veer around to the northeast, so that was why we were working our way to the west. And then I think we went too far before making our final drive over for Bermuda. But I'm with you that it's too hard to predict.
A little louder, please.
It's just hard to predict and kind of sail BMG to where we're going.
Right. Question? Disagreement? Everybody found the adverse current due to the line, eh? At a knot and a half. Sam?
Hard to say, because we lost our instruments for about 40 hours.
That'll do it.
But I didn't get a sense of that first current. We were west of Rhode Line going into the stream. We lost our instruments about maybe 6 hours before we entered the stream, so it wasn't quite clear when we got there. And didn't get everything up and running until we were well clear of it. I didn't get a sense that we were getting adverse current. The only weird current we had was a westward drift from about 100 miles out to maybe 50 miles out.
Right.
And that was fairly pronounced, but it seemed to be almost due west.
Right. Good. So you may have been fairly close to the rum line when you got down out of the main body of the stream. I mean, fairly close, like 15 miles east of the rum line.
Yeah.
Something like that. And you might have been a little further east.
I know we never got fully east of the rum line. We were looking for, thinking we might try to pick up that eddy.
Yeah.
David had decided to march further west, given 16 and 18 when those eddies had moved a lot further west than anyone had thought. I was not going to go searching for it, particularly without instruments.
Well, you know, if anybody, if you remember me talking about religion and things, that I usually have to get dragged to get much east of the rum line. This time was to some extent different. And so there was some subtlety in the structure of the flow as you moved east of the rum line, coming down and carrying down east for quite a ways. Good. Thank you. Who do we have? Group 5. Anybody? Who's yours?
Right here.
What do you have to say?
So we hit the Gulf Stream a little further west of where we had ultimately wanted to because we couldn't reach our way down. Caught the Gulf Stream motion easterly and southerly, and then crossed back over to get the southeast eddy movement southerly. Kept moving west to anticipate a wind shift, and then dived over to finish.
So you stayed west of the line all the way?
No, not until we got past the southeast eddy.
I got you. Okay. So you hit the Gulf Stream, or you entered the Gulf Stream?
We were east for maybe 30 miles of the rum line. Then we crossed west at the southerly portion of after we got out of the cold eddy, the southeast cold eddy, in anticipation of wind.
Still a couple hundred miles or more from Bermuda.
Yes. No, not a little over 100. Yeah, it was not.
Okay, 100. That's a big difference. That sounded very similar, probably to a lot of our tracks.
I think so.
Did you
We weren't alone.
Was there ever no wind?
It was very light, probably 8 to 24 hours before the end of the race. It was down to 3 or 4 knots. We actually dropped our mainsail and sailed under A sail alone because it was just trying to ghost along.
How many had what they would class as no wind or calm? So there are a few.
Yeah, after the, like, between the southwester and the northwester. First day.
The first hours. I'm discounting the confusion with the fog and the southwester, it was southeaster.
It never got below 5 knots.
No, right.
A lot of shifts.
I thought I heard some really had some pretty light air further down the track.
We had twos. We had firmly 2s and 1s for a little while. Day 3.
Right.
When they were flying just their spinnaker, we were seeing. That's what we were seeing. We're pretty well calibrated.
Gardner's Bay sailing.
Yeah, it was a fall off sounding.
I had to bring that one back to February.
Frank, we did too. We got a couple of times within 250, 200 miles where we seemed to do very well finding light to no air more than we liked.
I think, again, that's very characteristic of the plane with the high.
And we eat sort of rum.
Right.
Good.
Yeah. That's perfect. Thank you. Do you? Masquerade. Oh, sorry.
The navigator starts to tell me what kind of boat they sell. So we can know the size and speeds and so we can compare.
Okay, where did we start? Reveille was double-headed?
Yeah, so Reveille is a Sigma 41, so a 20,000 pound, mid-80s IOR.
Thank you, that was very important information.
Toujours, the boat?
Type 37.
Part 37. Masquerade, Canadian. Burton's not here. He promised to be here.
He's picking his wife up from the airport.
Oh, that's, okay.
He said Casey's here. I just saw it. He said Casey's here.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, there you go, Casey.
Oh, you want me to say something?
Yeah, Andy told me you were going to speak.
Oh, really?
So he can speak for him.
Our plan was to win the start and extend.
And the result?
Hey, we almost won the Finisterre thing. We were only 25 minutes off. We jibed a little late. One of our jibes was a little late, and that might have been 25 minutes. And there were a couple of holes we fell into. We got down to 3 knots a couple of times, but other than that, we kept going.
And more or less the same track? Start in?
We were on the west side the whole way down.
The west side, the whole way
I think
down.
we got out 17 miles to the west and then got in a little closer. But we had about 30 knots of breeze, and we had a pole out with a 150 jib and a main. And if it had been my boat, I wouldn't have done it.
But nothing broke.
And there was one block on the preventer that broke. Yeah, because we had a flying jibe, and it was one of those big southwest blocks, and it just shattered. I never saw that before. And our navigator said, "Oh, that's standard. Those things always break."
Sounds like the hardware salesman we came across. Oh, that always happens. He tells you after you pay $300 for it. Or whatever.
I think it was an older block.
All right, we're the Class 9, Prevail. Nobody from Prevail. You're hearing quite a mix here of play in rumline areas. Some east, a little bit west, and probably doing, at least from a class standpoint, if not from a fleet standpoint, just as well, depending on how hard you're pushing the boat and what you're running into. Class 10. Class 10. Delusion, or otherwise known as Illusion. Mr. Honey, the winner of the whole shebang.
We went west, east, west, and then east again. So we did 4 changes. We only jibed 3 times, but right after the start, we sagged deep on starboard, and probably the leewardmost boat in the fleet. And we did that in order to tee ourselves up so that we could enter the stream at the top of the meander without having to fight down. So we wanted enough room so that we would just naturally get to the top of the meander. And that worked fine. We changed from the 3 to the jib top and then to the spinnaker, and ended up fetching right into the top of the meander. I didn't know whether the Mercator or the Artos was going to be right for the meander, but basically every solution I came up with had us entering the stream at the same point, whichever model was right. And then I figured once we entered the stream, I'd look at the angle of the stream, and then I'd see whether it was the Artos or whether it was the Mercator that was paying out. So we got into the stream within a couple of miles of where I wanted for the entry point. It turned out very quickly that the stream was running to the southeast. So it looked as though the Mercator was the more accurate of the 2. So we sailed into the stream right into max current, right in the axis, and then jibed, and then sailed along the axis of the stream, and then jibed back to starboard. And that's a trickier exit jibe on a slower boat than it is on the maxis that I often sail, because you got to jibe it, you got to get that vector right to get out of the stream where you want to. Right. But given that we knew it was the Mercator that was working, we planned our jibe to exit the stream at the bottom of the meander. On a hunch from previous years, I played that cold eddy that was south of the stream a little bit further east than was forecast. So on the Mercator, we were crossing it, pretty much close to the center of the eddy, and I think that hunch paid off because we had favorable current across that. I ignore all of the models for current after the first eddy south of the stream, because I've always found that everything south of that, the models often get that first eddy right, but everything south of that, I found it's just chaos. And so I just ignored that, so I even stopped looking at the models after the first eddy. And then, so then it was all wind. So then we worked our way back to the west in order to tee the boat up for a ley line in the expected veer to the northeast. And then that paid out well. We got that ley line right and then sailed in. So we had basically 3 jibes total. One at the axis of the stream, another one on the axis in order to leave the stream, and then the third one when we were west of the run line, positioning the boat for the veer to the north to come in and finish on port.
I like what you had to say about the 2 different models, first of all. And because of course we're playing with the altimetry-based model, right. Which also looked to be pretty good. I can talk about that in a minute. But the cold ring and the behavior of that, that's always a little bit difficult to determine, particularly in the presence of meander. Right. Because meander can keep the cold ring under the influence of the stream. It's not really broken free of the influence of the stream, and push it a little further west than you would think, push it a little further east than you would think. You like it to be drifting. Most of those rings, when they form up, if they were clear of the stream, they'd be drifting towards Hatteras, long term. But when they catch a little bit of stream influence, they're pushed a little further east. Right. And it looked that way this time, but it was a subtlety, definitely a subtlety. And then what was the max current you saw in the main body, do you think?
I think we might have briefly seen 4, low 4s, and then lots of high 3s. Right. Just hours and hours of high 3s.
Anybody find any higher? No.
I don't know if we were higher than that, but we got one of the slowest boats in the fleet, and we hit 14.5 knots for a little while, but then again, we also had no insurance for 2 days.
The other thing, of course, we've talked about parenthetical. We've also talked about instrument calibrations. You know, before the season gets going, you want to calibrate your instruments. We saw the same thing. Looking for a 5, which can be found if you have the patience to go look for it, it's possible, finding a 5. But for the most part, 3, maybe 4 was the speed we were seeing.
I was seeing 4, 5, 4, 7.
Were you?
In the core of the stream.
Right. We're looking at cores. Speaking of that.
We saw 4.7, 4.8.
Right.
I'm curious as to what the temperature was that you were seeing, the high temp.
You know, for years, I haven't really focused on the temperature that much because it's the current that matters for our racing. And depending on the wind, you know, the wind can blow the warm water one way or the other relative to the current. So I've taken to focusing on, you know, the current itself. And it is interesting that, of course, the model is initialized with everything. They'll use temperature, they'll use altimetry, they'll use buoys and ships. But they have the benefit of knowing what the wind has been doing for days, you know, before. And so they can predict that blowing of the warm water. So, and then for wind itself, I use in this area the EC, GFS, and the arpège. And I thought the GFS was working pretty darn well.
Very well. Now, again, parenthetical. We look at temperature because it's easy, number one, and cheap too. If you don't, you can use a thermometer. Okay. But from the oceanographic standpoint, all these currents, for the most part, are influenced by water column density. Even though the long-term gyre, the North Atlantic, is circular, driving. But local stuff, you have a temperature salinity gradient, which is a density gradient, which affects pressure, just like atmospheric pressure drives wind. This pressure gradient drives currents. And the reason that you play so much with temperature is that the salinity variations across the edge of the stream are relatively small effects, and you can measure temperature. So temperature and currents are generally well correlated, but for the complication of the warmer water being blown around.
Right.
So there is a value to looking at temperature beyond the obvious, and there are some justifications saying that temperature and currents are fairly well correlated. That's how we get to where we got. That's not absolute, of course. You know, the scientists always leave a back door on the whole thing, but that's the idea. Question?
Yes, this is for our navigator from Illusion. When you did the final jibe, I assume you were still 150 miles or so away from Bermuda?
Right.
And then at that point, you were a little bit on the, what we would call the east side of the run line?
Yes.
West side.
You were on the west side?
Yeah, we're on the west side on starboard, and then our final jibe was to port. And then we did the approach. Because we jibed in about a 350, expecting it to continue to veer. And it did, and I think we finished in a 20 or 30.
So on that west side, that last 24 hours, did you also encounter an adverse current there?
We did, but again, I don't try to get those currents right. I just, after the first eddy south of the stream, I just assume that's just the luck of the draw, and I'm unwilling to sail an extra mile to try to optimize, because I found that the predictions down there are just terrible. So I just figure that's what I run into in current that's that far south is just a function of clean living or luck or something else.
So was your clean living good for a current less than a knot?
We had, it was changing around. We had I guess it was probably half and half, favorable and unfavorable current. But at that point, I just figure it's the hand of card that I've dealt, and I just live with it. But I don't try to get it right down there, because you sail an extra mile, and you've spent that extra mile, on a bet. And if you don't sail that extra mile, then at least you have that mile.
Stan, just continuation of that question. I'm a long-term armchair quarterback or navigator from the rail, but first-time navigator in the race. Pre-stream, if you haven't set it up correctly, are you willing to spend anything to get to the right entry point of the stream if you found yourself in advanced current north, adverse current north of the stream?
Yeah, I found the models really good for the north wall. And in this case, we had this big uncertainty. You know, RTOS didn't show much of a meander, and Mercator did. But we had this funny situation where it was free to find out, meaning all of the entry points were the same. So I figured, okay, that's where I'm going in, and then as soon as I'm there, I'll know. And then I'll know whether to bother to jive in the Mercator current or whether to just sail across it and come up with a new plan. But it was very clear as soon as we entered that it was the Mercator that nailed it.
Right. We, north of the stream, found a cold water east to west current, about 2 knots before entering the warm water typical stream.
Yeah.
I don't know if you encountered that as well, but would you ever battle against that to get to that point, or just if you've missed it, sail straight through the stream and hope for the best?
Well, I guess if RTOS had been the model that nailed it, well, then I wouldn't have, jived for a non-existent meander. I probably would have, worked across the stream and then, kind of been, I don't know actually right now what the plan would have been in hindsight.
Okay.
But it would have been a whole different setup, a whole different hand of cards. But it was interesting to me that it became evident, really quickly that it was Mercator that got it. Right. But in Hobart's, where there have been situations where RTOS and Mercator disagreed, and it wasn't possible to figure out who had it right for free, what I've often done is just been unwilling to spend extra miles for either one of them.
Right.
And actually won the last Hobart doing that. A lot of navigators bet extra miles for models that they couldn't be sure were right. And I found it safest to just not sail the extra miles.
And just sail what you're in?
Yeah.
Go through it?
Yeah, just...
Particularly in that area. Now, the only exception to that is if you find a warm core ring in there.
Okay.
Then you've got maybe 3 knots of current adverse for an area. What we had this time, if you took a look at it on the IR image, was very nice north wall, but there was something of a wake showing up. Now, anytime you see differences in temperature, you have a potential for currents. We just got through that. So there was a tongue of warm water up in there that could give you a little bit of push east, but then you get through the tongue and it gives you a little push west when you get through the bottom of it. So most of us just ignored that. Make for the entry point on the stream and blow right on down. Part of it is because you figure you just got right or you left. Part of it is you don't believe it, what you're looking at. You're just going to go for the stream. Okay. The other thing to remember is if it happened to be a very light air race, there is a general drift, and it can be up to a half a knot of current offshore from Nova Scotia down to Hatteras. The general flow of the coastal current is down the coast. And you can see that as well sometimes. But it all depends on you. That didn't matter anyway, this one. This one. There was a question, sorry.
Stan, I didn't follow your track. Can you just generally describe where you entered the Gulf Stream in relation to the rum line?
Did you hear the question?
No.
Don't be afraid to ask.
The question was,
No.
The question is where do we enter the stream? And off the top of my head, I don't recall the coordinates, but it was right at the top of the meander on the stream.
Was that the rum line?
Yeah, just to the west of the rum.
Yeah, it was just west of rum.
Just to the west of rum.
And then our exit point was right at the bottom of the Mercator meander. And in a slower boat like Illusion, you got to get that one right, because if you exit late, you get flushed further east than you wanted to be.
Yeah.
So that one was tricky. But I also found it was easier navigating a slower boat because there's a lot of probes out there.
Question?
Thanks, Frank. Just to, Stanley, roughly how many miles from where you exit there? Do you think it was?
I'm sorry? What was the question?
Roughly how many miles from where you entered do you think you exited that meander?
150 miles?
Yeah, I think it was a long way. Yeah. The full length of the Mercator meander.
Yeah.
So I think it was 150 miles. Right. And we jived twice in that period in order to stay centered up.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? It's all clear now, right? You just go fast and go. Anybody from Carina? I hope. Well, the number 2 boat back there, 23 minutes later, was Froya. So I can tell you that our track was very similar to what Stan was talking about. came in top of the meander, just to the west of the run line, rode down the meander best we can, about 3 knots of current. Very sensitive to getting out the bottom, because getting out of some of those meanders is always interesting, particularly if the air gets a little bit light. You may find yourself heading for Ireland, sort of a thing. And we stayed east for quite a while down, and we were being followed and traced by a lot of boats to the east, and we were hoping that they would stay east and we would sneak over west as the air was softening. In anticipation of the wind shift and maybe a little bit fresher wind. Commanders, or one of them, was telling us that we might get a little fresher wind within 150 miles or so of Bermuda to the west of the line. So we snuck down across the line, maybe 150 out, and found that it was a frustrating go for a while to make the mark. It really wasn't until about maybe 50 miles or so, early in the morning of the finish, that breezes really came in northeast and gave us a reach to the finish. But it was, I guess, we never really, we used every sail in the bag. We didn't break anything, we didn't blow anything out. One of the difficulties in this race was not so much that it was 30 knots of wind or something like that, but a little bit of a confused seaway. A lot of leftover swell from other stuff. So he didn't have a nice following seaway. He sometimes had some crossing stuff that sort of filled up the cockpit or that sort of thing going. Pretty standard rundown. I don't know, some of our press talked about the thunder and the rest of it. There's been a lot of worse conditions. We didn't have much wind against the current, which was to the good. And it was just had to pay attention and keep sailing the boat all the time. Push was the main issue on this one. Again, I remind you, you look at the differences in time, everything's within an hour. And one of the reasons that I don't like to get east of the line is, in general, nine times out of 10, when you come into Bermuda, you got a southwesterly breeze. Meaning I got to take my 38-footer and beat it up to Bermuda. And if I'm off 5 miles, that's an hour. Pick a number. And not many races are won and lost, or within an hour, easily within the hour. We're talking about minutes. You know, you talk about where do you get 23 minutes setting that chute or taking down that pole. And Jay Gowles, if you're around, Chris, I could tell you about what a Spinnaker wrap means to you. And there's a few others. Towey, another Cal 40 can tell you something about a busted Spinnaker pole. So it's all a matter of minutes and paying attention to details in the game for 600 miles plus. Sort of amazing how it all goes. 11, 12, Christopher Dragon. They were on the dock. Zigzag? Yeah, good. Come on up.
I'm not the navigator, but I'm the one that's left. We went pretty much east. I think we went pretty far east. I haven't checked the tracks. We intended on going east, and we stayed east, and we spent maybe 40 minutes to the west of the run line after the stream. I can't tell you exactly where we entered. We intended to go at the top of the meander, but we were never west of the run line there. And we did pick up the cold ring and got quite a push from that. We sat still, obviously, the first day, went in circles, went backwards a few hours after the finish, but still pointed east, east, east. And even though the models were telling us to maybe go west at the end, our navigator was very much dead set on not doing that, just sort of saying, this never works. And, you know, true or not. And we just kept pushing all the way through. We got some really big seas out there, very confused seas. Not that much wind, probably 25 was the most we saw consistently. But we still managed to make the boat go fast and broke very little. We broke a stanchion, 2 spinnaker blocks on the back of the boat, and that's it, I think.
Great. Question? Yeah, John.
But what's the most east you got of rum, you think, during the race?
About, I decided 30 or 34 miles. It was a little, I was personally nervous, but it wasn't my call, but you kept seeing that number get further and further, that cross track. And, but also we hit our points where we wanted to be within about 7 miles. So it was basically the plan. We were able to execute the plan and stuck with it.
Good. And you got a nice push from the coal rig. You found the coal rig.
The coal rig was great. I feel like we definitely didn't see the 4s and 5s of the mainstream. We saw maybe 2 or 3, and maybe we just were too far east and just
But the coal rig gave you 2 knots?
2.5.
Yep. You were right in the core of it.
Yeah.
So that was, again, it's verifying the variety of models for the structure. I think this time we did, they did, for the most part, a pretty good job on all that. No surrender. No surrender, no surrender. How about hound? Vamoose? Nobody there from the holes. Speaking of the classic boat and the golf course, right? Hound. Great to see them doing so well there. Gemini 2?
Here, over here. Hi.
Yeah.
Peter Pine, was a navigator. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what's been said already, you know, sort of applied to us. Relatively fast boat. We were getting very fast routing, and we didn't want to get too far from the run line and go chase, basically spend miles, and that sort of paid off. We entered the stream, so we did, you know, we did fight after the start. That was the squall came through actually at our start. It was quite the start. If you see the pictures, and then the wind died, and we, you know, battled hard to keep the boat moving. Then when the wind filled back in, we went east, initially kind of as the southwest filled in, got east of the rum line, and we entered probably near the rum line. We did see some of the meander, although I felt that we were a little further east, we might have seen more, but it sort of our position paid off as we got into Sunday when those northwest filled in, and we just had an amazing day with Spinnaker. You know, the boat surfed very well in the conditions, and you know, we were, you know, surfing 17, 18. We saw over 20 knots. So that really paid off. That was our day. You know, well over 200 miles, and stayed east all the way. Probably not that far, maybe 10, 15 miles, and we did cut back across at the end to try to take advantage of that shift, but we were a little early, and we wound up having to kind of battle downwind at the finish. It was a bit slow. Another boat in our class that we wound up correcting over, they were a bit to the east of us in Cougar, and they got in really without jiving, got to condition shoals, but we had to do a lot of jives and a lot of light air downwind work to get in. But you know, overall it was, you know, it was a good race. We were lucky. All of our Spinnaker survived. We did have a couple really good broaches. We did have a wrap, and you know, during a change, and we decided to kind of cool it down. We just got everything down, cleaned up, put up the jib top, just everyone relax, you know, let the night pass, and then start flying again in the morning. And you know, it was good. And I talked to a lot of other people that had similar experiences, but we're lucky that all of our chutes survived. Was key, and we did have an accidental jibe that bent stanchion preventer worked, but you know, it was overall the boat was very, very reliable. We had a fleet broadband system that worked very well for satellite communications, and yeah.
What was it? Broadband?
It's an older fleet broadband 150 system, but it worked great for position reports. We used the Expedition integration for Yellow Brick and for weather download. So
I heard mention of a preventer. I've heard several stories about preventers and the value of them and the problems with them, but to be reminded that they really do save heads, particularly on the deck sweepers. And there was a couple of boats that said, well, we were pinned with the thing. We had a to-weather broach laying down, and the boom is up in the air, and the preventer's holding it up there. But better there than here, so.
We saw that.
Something to remember in all of this.
I mean, the only looking back, as it felt was good, I would have liked to get a little further to the east and set up from the east so we didn't have to get over to the west. We could have used some of that speed that we had in the northwest to get a little further east, kind of looking back. I think that could have, made a difference, put us way up, but I mean, it was a good race for us. So.
Yeah, some of it is in hindsight,
yeah.
And some of it, the timing on a lot of this was so critical. You got there an hour before me, you could have had this, an hour or two later it would have been that.
Yeah.
And so you got to, again, you play with what you dealt. And I think that's why we went off to the west, what we did, and it sort of worked out in the finish, and we're a few hours behind Stan on that one. But I thought the finish was good. We were reaching into the finish.
Yeah, we saw that westerly foul current all the way from south of the stream to Bermuda. It was more westerly and coming from the east, so it wasn't as bad. I saw it all the time, and as we got further south, I felt that sort of had a little bit of a southerly component, and it wasn't impacting us, but that was kind of painful. That Rob,
The meander.
Yeah.
You said you were fairly close to the rum line, right? And you didn't.
Yeah, I try to remember. Just east of it, I think, just east, right at the top of the meander. But we didn't stay in. I felt we could have gone a little further east once in the stream to probably ride.
Stay with it.
Yeah. So we were also tracking two boats in our class, and we were decided to kind of play between them, and
right.
So.
Right. We're going to see some of that same thing going home. We looked at the altimetry-based models this morning, and the meander is still there, a little further east, not much, but it's going to give you some interesting currents in the knuckle to come down. So some folks that really rode in the core of the meander going down get that 3 knots go or so, and if you're a little bit over to the west, you're getting in sort of the eddy region of the meander, back of the elbow, if you will. That gives you some interesting currents in there. And I think he may have been seeing some of that. He got out of the meander early. Meander was going out more southeast than they were going. He gets into this lighter current in the elbow, and makes for interesting condition as you go. Where are we? Thank you. Callisto? Nobody from Callisto. Matador crossed by Arctic, Alchemist. Anybody around from Alchemist? We know what Warrior 1 did. I don't know where she went. But the other thing to remember in this race is that we're going to Bermuda. Right? We leave Newport and we go to Bermuda. And if we can do it at 18 knots, we don't care too much about the Gulf Stream. I suspect that Warrior 1's track was pretty much from here to there, without too much fooling around. But that's just one man's view.
They were very far to the west of the
they went way west.
They went way west.
Yeah.
Is it a straight line way west?
No, they were living up to Zigzag's name.
So, I like gin, he likes single malt, whatever, taste. I think that's about it, folks. All we have to share, unless you want to share something back. Speak.
Yeah, I got a question about for Stan and others about the approach to Bermuda. So what you did, Stan, was jibed when the wind was about 350, and then kind of rode it down all the way. So we were coming in Monday early evening, I guess, and we tried to do the same thing. We jibed, I want to say, 40 miles ahead of bang in the corner, and the expectation of getting the shift and running it down. And all the boats that carried on and banged the corner and came in hot made about 2 to 3 hours on us. And I don't know if we misplayed it. What you could look at as a persistent shift, or if we just sailed into a hole and everybody else got better weather or get better wind right close to Bermuda. Does that make sense?
In that part of the course, there were squalls that you could get behind and
This group. This was Monday evening. I don't think there were already any.
Yeah, when I say squalls, I mean, just big hazy areas.
Yeah, so
you get behind one of those, and then that can hurt you.
Which boat were you on?
In theory.
Say again?
In theory. I saw that very clearly, Crocodile Nav.
Oh, yeah.
In theory crossed us roughly 25 miles before we did roll, and I think what it was a light shift. It didn't really get to 350 at that point.
Yep.
It did later, so it really came back to the 330 realm.
There was a fake there.
Yes.
Yeah, it looked like it was going and then it didn't.
Right.
And then it came back later.
And it went horribly light. I just didn't know if there was a kind of weather pattern that accelerated the wind close to Bermuda that you guys will sail into, or
we just held out, and it didn't go to 350 for us for another steady 350 for another 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
That's exactly right. And then we went on the 350 and rolled up, and when she came to the 30 realm, we were on the realm.
Yeah. It was a horror show.
Yeah, it's a turbulent flow, and so you have a patchwork quilt out there until the system really gets established from a gradient, and it took a while there. I mean, we were being frustrated to the west of the line at that point. Hanging, we were a couple of hours, well, 12 hours behind you. 5 o'clock the next morning's finished.
I think the kind of naive question to experts is, would you play that slow shift as a persistent shift? Would you sort of jibe it? All things being equal, if the shift was going to come in as predicted, would you pay it as a persistent shift? Are you dig in and then jibe, or would you go with it and kind of take the curve down? Because the reading said take the curve down, and that didn't work.
I mean, there's no absolute right answer, but I think you look at the sky, you try to avoid the hazy areas, you let the sea state inform the decision. In our case, the sea state was horrible just before the jibe, so we pushed the jibe a little sooner than I otherwise would have. And then all else being equal, you kind of have to bet on the models because they're better than we are. And so I would use the model to, for the long term, lay line, but I kind of inform that or update that with the difficulty of the sea state at the time of the jibe and the location of those hazy areas to try to stay away from a situation where you're upwind of one of those hazy areas. Because that was an easy way to lose a couple hours, is to be in the terrible sea state upwind of the hazy area.
Right.
Good to know now.
Any others? Yes, go.
I have a question, I guess in particular for Stan, but for anyone who found themselves successfully staying in that meander, because we had heated up a little bit. We ended up a bit further east than we wanted to be to hit that meander, so we heated it up to try to make it to it out of the Gulf Stream. But we found we weren't finding it. We were staying in colder water, so we just went back to BMG mode. At which point we actually had a knot and a half favorable current for quite a long time, but it wasn't really what the meander was forecasting. So I'm wondering, for those of you who did hit the meander, did you see warm water as you would anticipate, or did anyone else see long periods of favorable current that weren't just an eddy gone here and then gone? Because I was surprised to have favorable current for so long after the Gulf Stream, the main stream.
I'm not exactly sure what we're looking at. We had plenty of warm water.
Yeah.
Very hot. And we were getting from the top of the meander to what I count as the bottom and or out of the main body of the stream was about 150 miles.
Yeah.
And we were on the order of, I have to stare at the plot, but working on the order of 20 miles, 25 miles or so east of the rum line, going down, maybe a little more. It looked like everything was behaving the way we had expected to behave. We came in top end, west of the rum line, and we're steering 161 or something like that, and making 147 over the ground. And so we're getting swept down. And we rode that, and as I said, we're careful when we came out the bottom that we kept going where we wanted to go and not get swept east. It all looked pretty much like the altimetry model that I was showing to you. behaved. Now, we didn't get into much of a boost from the cold core feature because we weren't far enough east on that. But I didn't find much in the way of adverse current either in that area. Some of it's within the limitations of our instrumentation, but that's another story. And the observer, your averaging time when you look at what you got and how you take that. But you said you saw more cold water?
Yeah, once we got out of the mainstream, which we only stayed in for the mainstream, we didn't see much beyond in the meander. We had maybe, it went from 84 to 78 or something Fahrenheit. Yeah. And,
in the 80s, 80 degree water pretty much to Bermuda.
Yeah, it just was much cooler than what it had been in the most, in the strongest part of the stream. So I was surprised to still be seeing such favorable current with relatively colder water.
Yeah.
Actually, Frank, we were like 4 hours at 83, 84 degrees and 4 plus knots. And then we went out of it and down to 77 degrees and
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Never saw 80 again for another 200 miles.
And how far, where were you? East of the rum line?
At that point, you were west.
We were west of the rum line at that point by about 10 miles.
Yeah. West. You have to look.
Just really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we carried 80 for quite a while. Now, again, it's a calibration, maybe a calibration thing.
Well,
yeah, maybe it's a thermometer calibration, because we were not far from you.
Right.
And we, after the mainstream, we were 75, 77 the whole rest of the race.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Just a question, I see we were recording this, is this going to be posted somewhere, we want to, maybe our crew members want to come back and look at it?
Yes.
It's going to be on a website?
If the camera's working.
Where?
On the website.
Okay.
It'll be on the YouTube channel too.
And before you break up, the protest committee would like to know if Gus Forsman or Tax is in the room. Here. I'd like to visit with you when you get a chance. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much for coming on the race. Thanks, Frank. No, I appreciate it.